someone had punched him mid-slip. There were a lot of variations on what happened and how, but they were only theories. They got turned into rumors, and a lot of us were just trying to make sense of all of it. Larry was a pretty run-of-the-mill kind of guy. He was a landscaper who made lame jokes at kid parties. That's the thunder. He was about as nondescript as they came, at least as far as a bunch of teenagers were concerned. We got halfway through the day before Mr. Straub shut the bleachers on his neck. It was in front of the cheerleaders. There were ambulances again, crying girls and boys, and even some teachers. Most of them just looked confused, except for Mr. Straub. I mean, he managed to get a glimpse of him as I jogged over to find out what all the screaming was about. He looked empty of all thoughts and emotions, and his head set a crooked angle. I figured that was how people must look when they're dead, but apparently he'd been like that during the act. He walked up. He perched his neck between the slatted benches and hit the remote button to the slide the features closed. Whole time, he was just slack-jawed and stupid-looking, even as a metal mechanism crunched his vertebrae. And cartilage. I later learned Larry had been like this too when he had taken his life. He was getting ready to pop the tap on a fresh beer when he simply stopped, looked up to the sky, and then forced the whole thing down his throat in a single world-shattering moment. I didn't know it back then, but there were others just like Larry and Mr. Straub. You see, a barista at a coffee shop steamed half the skin off her arm while keeping an eye contact with the guy in the drive-thru. A doctor at the local clinic used a biopsy needle to inject air straight into his own heart. Lots of people shot themselves, but not one of them aimed for the head. Nope. That's a weird touch, if you think about it. These people obliterated their torsos and limbs with high-powered rifles at point blank range. No reason, just a vacant expression as they deleted bits of their bodies and left nothing left but ragged stumps. There was no school the next day, which is to be expected. The only real clue I got about how panicked the local authorities were. Wouldn't be long before the national authorities joined in on the panic too. But that would come later. That morning my parents left the house at 9:30 a.m. for a meeting at the town hall. And they dropped me off at my grandma's on the way. I waited for them to leave before I told my grandma and always encouraged me to make my own adventures outside. I had no plans. None. I didn't even want to visit my friends. I thought about Mr. Straub's face as I crossed empty farmers' fields and walked into the woods. I had been to an open casket funeral once. It was for Father Dennis, who christened me as a baby. Not that I remember anything about him except his stony face, resting gently in the soft white folds of his casket. That seemed so long ago and so sterile that the thought of it was a bit sad. But not a whole lot of other feelings came. It seemed so long ago. But Mr. Straub, now his face was different. He had frightened me with his swollen lips and bulging eyes. Alive one moment and dead the next. The only pain to separate the two. And yet he looked so bored, hanging there from his own broken neck, still wearing those ridiculous red shorts he always had on, no matter what it was like outside. If it was snowing, he had them on, and if it was hot, he had them on. It's like he didn't have another pair. It took time to recognize that seeing a dead body had really freaked me out. I felt like it shouldn't have messed with me as much as it did. I just didn't understand, I guess. There was some anger mixed in with all those thoughts in my head. It's also why I pushed on through the woods until the trees began to thin, marching in the humid summer heat until my t-shirt was soaked and my legs ached miserably. I wanted to feel pain. I wanted to feel tired. Wanted it, so the only thing I could think of were my throbbing hamstrings and sunburned forehead. It all ended when I reached the tracks. Shaggy rocks and boulders rose steeply on the opposite side. Only other ways to go were left into town, and then right into a dark tunnel, its mouth bristling with ivy. At least the air coming from it was cold, so I took a second stand and caught my breath, feeling the sweat cool and evaporate as the wind billowed gently out of the darkness. It wasn't stupid, though. I paid close attention in case I heard the sound of any passing trains. When I did hear one, I raced off the tracks as quickly as I could. It honked as it came past. Another day, I might have worried that I was gonna get in trouble for playing on the tracks. But all I could really think about was the thing I'd seen lying on or beside the tracks. It had been lit up by the train as it came roaring out of the tunnel, not far from the entrance, in a strange silence after the train had gone. There was only the dim light of the setting sun to see inside the tunnel everything looked the same. Old clothes, broken bottles, discarded crates, trash strewn around whatever it found. Space. But I knew what I'd seen in the harsh white light of the train's passing beams. It was a hell of a lot more than garbage. I'd seen a man. He was lying face down. There'd been a hand, bright and pale like the moon in the night sky. I was sure of it. I didn't know what to do. I didn't. Not right away, anyway. I was afraid and didn't want to go inside. But I couldn't just pretend I hadn't seen him either. I tried shouting to them. If someone down there heard me, they gave me no sign of it at all. It wasn't until I actually stepped into the darkness and let my eyes adjust, I confirmed there was a man lying down. He was draped across the tracks and he didn't have any legs. And judging by the way the blood stains had turned the color of brown, he'd been there for a while. Well, half a dozen trains must have gone right over him, thinking he was just a piece of old cloth or something. That's if they saw anything at all. And that time he dried out a little. He wasn't a mummy or anything, but the blood on his stumps and coming out of his mouth looked more like jelly or corn syrup. I was sobbing at this point, crying hard as I tried to make sense of what I was meant to do, while also feeling like all of this was terribly unfair on me. There was a moment where I could almost feel myself wanting to be a kid again. A proper one, little, one who doesn't have to do things, one who cannot be upset and scream and run away. I'd only just started to appreciate how badly I'd been messed up by Mr. Straub, and then God went and dropped that kind of nightmare in my lap. Teeth stained black with blood and open eyes that looked at nothing at all. Nope. It felt like a nightmare. Hell, it was a nightmare. Just a moment with the body, but everything else too. Everything since that beer beneath the tree had felt like it wasn't part of reality anymore. But you see, one thing's for sure. Nightmares end. I was outside gasping, vomiting, crying my eyes out when I heard something shuffling in the tunnel. I had just run out, just ran. Part of me thought, what a sound must mean. That it must mean that someone was alive and close by, and that meant I was not alone. But another part of me thought something else entirely. It was the part of me that took over and stopped me from crying or making any more noise. My mouth turned dry as a desert. And all of a sudden I was no longer hot all over, but freezing cold. And my legs were backpedaling away from the tunnel with short, quiet steps. The noise persisted. It was the shuffle of something getting dragged over gravel. rhythm to it that was slow. The word that springs to mind is one I was taught in biology class long, long time ago. Locomotion. Something down here was moving. It was moving towards me. It sounded slow and broken and feeble, but that didn't matter. Somehow, even though I knew it wasn't completely insane, I just knew what was gonna come out of that tunnel. I knew it the way the rabbit knows the wolf, or the ant knows the spider. Spider, spider, spider. But still, when I saw him crawl out of the dark and into the light, I screamed so loud I have a sore throat. It lasted a couple days. It was the man from the tracks, and even though he moved, he was not alive. I tried telling myself that he couldn't have been dead because only living things move. But that was horseshit. He dragged his bloody legless torso with one working arm while the other lay dislocated across his back. The fingers of both hands curling as he heaved himself along. And that same empty gawking expression like Mr. Strawn's. He wasn't alive. He was a dead thing, and that made him kind of an impossible monster. I turned as quickly as I could and ran screaming through the woods. The whole time I could only think of the thing that was behind me and was trying to close the distance between us. It didn't even matter that it was slow. It didn't matter that I ran for over an hour. It didn't even matter that I wasn't sure if I knew my way home or was even running in the right direction. All that mattered was putting one foot in front of the other until there was nothing left inside me. Time turned strange and funny. Seconds moved into strange staccatos, until eventually I collapsed on legs that had turned into rubber. Then I dragged myself into an old tree hollow to hide, and that is where I lost all consciousness. When I woke up, the sun had set and it was dark. I vomited and then got back on my way to the beaten path, stumbled achingly through the cold night air back to my grandmother's house. Oh, Dad was sick, very sick. Grandma screamed something to the effect of me as she held down his right arm while my mother tried to grip his head with her blood-slick hands. He resisted with dumb determination. My little sister cried, watching the scene like a shell-shocked soldier. There was grunting and sobbing, and suddenly a bang, and then a puff of plaster rained down onto my head, and everyone began to yell and shriek a little louder. Sorry about my dog, but this is the only time I have to film. Then a puff of plaster rained down onto my head, and everyone began to shriek and yell a little louder. tried to grip his head in her blood-slick hands. He resisted with dumb determination. "My sister," she cried, watching the scene like a shell-shocked soldier. There was a grunting and a sobbing, and suddenly a bang, then a puff of blaster rained down on my head, and everybody began to yell and shriek a little louder. Dad had a gun. That was what my grandmother was trying to wrestle out of his hands. She held a knife, and that's why there was blood. But I didn't know whose it was. I wasn't sure that she was planning to do with it until she tried to use it to cut his trigger finger off. The scuffle resulted in another bang, and a window exploded outwards. I finally ducked and grabbed my sister, rushing her into another room. But there were three more explosions outwards. Oh, something broke inside of me. By the time I heard my name being called, I was half deaf, twitching at things that weren't even there. My sister pleaded for me to come back, her pink fingers grasping at me as I put her down. But my mother was shouting. She was shouting. She wanted me to come help, and I wanted to keep my family safe. She told me to get something to tie Dad up while she and my grandmother used both arms to pin each of his wrists to the ground. His hand bled weakly as my grandma used every inch of her strength to simultaneously pin him and stop the flow of blood. He thrashed slowly beneath them, his movements languid and easy. But I could tell it was a struggle for them to keep him down. As I ran to the garage, I saw the gun on the ground with Dad's severed finger nearby. I kicked it out of reach before returning with the rope my grandmother used to tie the garage door open during hot summers. My mom tied the knots. My grandma tried to talk to my dad, and it was one of a few times in my life I saw her as a woman who'd once changed his diapers. She was so soothing and tender, her constant muttering that everything would be okay seemed so fragile. She was scared of him. Mom just did everything in her power to wrestle some safety out of the moment. Only once, his arms were securely behind his back, she was confident he wasn't breaking free. Did she stand back, put her hands behind her, and then immediately hunched forward and begin to sob. "Call an ambulance," my grandmother told me as she walked into the other room to get my sister. Before I got the phone, I briefly hugged my mom, who didn't seem to notice. I risked a glance at my dad, who didn't look at anything at all. His dead eyes gazed vacantly at nothing as he fought to free his arms. When he finally did look at me, it was no different to how I looked at the front door, floor, or wall. I didn't go to school the next day either. You see, some men men from the government came to take my dad in this morning. My mom ordered me to my room when they arrived. She asked them 1,000 questions, but their replies were short and stern and vague. Someone will be in contact with you shortly. When I ran to my window to look at them walking down the drive, I saw that all they wore were masks. One of them saw me staring. I thought he was going to wave, but he didn't. There was a biohazard symbol on their clothes, and they left. And after they left, Mom focused on making dinner and looking after my sister. She kept me close the whole time, barking anxious questions whenever I tried to leave the room. Where are you going? Just the bathroom. Okay then. I felt like she was painting normality into tissue paper, desperately afraid of breaking it. I tried my best to seem like I was okay. No, of course I wasn't. The last thing I wanted to do feel like was some kid who needed his mommy. We mostly just talked about mundane things, but it was hard for both of us. The only time the atmosphere seemed to change is when she asked me something strange halfway through dinner. Did your father, when you both went hunting a few months back, what did you do with the meat? I don't know, I shrugged. Dad took care of all of that. Why? The men who took him asked a whole bunch of questions about the meat. Then, with a fragile smile, she asked, have you done your homework? Then they told me your teacher would send you some assignments online. And just like that, with a thin pretense of normality, it all came back. But I was left with a wriggling feeling in my stomach. It didn't go away as the evening marched on. In fact, it only grew worse until I found myself in bed, rolling from side to side and thinking about my mom's question. The men who bundled up my dad and took him off hadn't seemed like the kind of men who messed around. They must have some idea what was going on. So why ask about the meat? On some level, I knew the moment she came and asked me why it was relevant. Dad loved to hunt. He always brought meat to parties and barbecues. Wasn't it loved to hunt? Wasn't it good meat? Had he brought back something from the woods? Had he? I hadn't gone hunting for a long time, nearly 3 months. Every time he'd asked, I'd refused, and I think he knew why. You see, on the very last trip, Dad shot 3 deer, but we only brought back 2. One was for us. One was for the town barbecue. The 3rd he shot, but we left it on the forest floor, because by the time it had died, it was pale and shaking, and even Dad couldn't keep the tremor out of his voice. Neither of us had expected the deer to stand up on his hind legs and walk towards us like a man. His gait a heavy and broken thing as it lumbered over to the forest coming even after Dad shot it 6 more times. But it's just still shambled forward on 2 misshapen legs as its brains painted the ferns a pestilent gray. When it finally fell, even Dad had gone pale, and in the silent aftermath, I had to go off and be sick in the bush. After we cut the trip short, Dad walked me gently back to the truck where the 2 deer we'd shot and trussed earlier that day lay waiting in the pickup. I don't think either of us remember they were there until later. He'd ask if I still wanted to head out with him each weekend, but he never seemed surprised when I made an excuse not to go. Not to go. The only time we talked about it was not long before the barbecue when he drove me to school one day. He didn't deal with it head on. He skirted the topic. You know, son, sometimes deer get sick, he told me. A little like old folks do. Remember Grandpa? He got real scary towards the end, didn't he? Well, deer get sick too, but we don't have to worry. Same way you couldn't catch what Grandpa had. Well, we can't catch what the deer have. Us humans are safe. Just an uncomfortable part of nature. It had come out of the blue, or at least it seemed like it had. I figured it was Dad's way of trying to get me back on board with hunting. He knew that I liked to go, and he liked me going with him. Father and son bonding. Well, I did. I loved it. At least until I'd seen that deer walk towards me on two legs. But lying in my bed that night after Mom had gone to sleep, I started to wonder if maybe he hadn't been trying to convince me. Maybe he carried a little doubt in himself about something he was gonna do. What if he had been trying to convince himself it was okay? I mean, 2 deer? I tried remembering what they'd been like. I hadn't checked them after we got into the truck. Why would I, right? It seemed as normal as any other as we tied them down, but I hadn't really been paying attention either. I've been hunting since I was 7. Helping my dad was so automatic to me. And to top it off, I hadn't known what I was meant to be looking for. I didn't know. I squirmed beneath the sheets and tried so hard to remember every detail of that trip. Every single detail. What the first 2 deer Dad had shot were like. Did they go down quick? They'd seem normal, but Grandpa had been sick with Alzheimer's a long time before he got scary. And I had to figure that the same would be true of those 2 deer. Who was to say that the one on hind legs was the only sick creature? Sick creature in the woods that day. I couldn't have forced these thoughts out of my head with a crowbar. At some point I accepted I wasn't getting any sleep that night and I settled down to torture myself. Some more until I realized it didn't have to be that way. Dad had an old freezer in the shed and he sometimes kept meat in there. Not for long. And usually not for eating. He used it for things he wanted to skin or dry and make a trophy out of. Which he rarely did since Mom didn't like that kind of thing in the house. But if the deer were not in the freezer in the kitchen or the garage, they might be in the shed. And if I did open the chest and saw 2 deer bodies in there, that meant whatever was going around and making people hurt themselves couldn't have come from our little hunting trip. I snuck out of my room as quietly and quickly as I could. Mom was on the phone with my grandma and she was crying. I stopped briefly by her door and listened to see if maybe they knew something I didn't. But after she started talking about how scared she was, I felt bad and I moved on. At least it meant she was too busy to notice me creeping down the stairs. I never liked the shed at the end of the yard. It was rarely used, even by my dad who kept the lawnmower and some old junk in there. It wasn't the kind of place you kept food, but I had this feeling he didn't keep these deer with the rest of the meat that he got from hunting. As I opened the back door and looked over the shadow-covered yard, I found myself thinking about the tunnel and what I'd seen back there, with everything that happened. Since I'd done a good job of convincing myself it never really happened at all. The man with no legs who dragged himself out of the darkness had become little more than a half-remembered nightmare. A moment out of time that was incompatible with logic and reason. But suddenly it was back with me. All of it. All the emotions and thoughts that raced through my head as I stared at his rotten flesh and glassy eyes. The walk to the shed wasn't easy. I fought the urge to turn around the entire way there. A moment out of time was incompatible with the logic and reason. But suddenly it was back with me. All the emotions and thoughts that raced through my head as I stared at his rotten flesh and glassy eyes. The walk to the shed wasn't easy. I fought the urge to run, turn around the entire time. Each step was like walking on feet made of lead. At the door, I paused with my hand poised by the lock. The house seemed so distant behind me. It became painfully aware nobody knew I was out here. In the dark, alone. Inside was nearly pitch black. Completely pitch black. My phone held. I held up, and its light made up for the darkness a little bit. But I didn't touch the nearby switch in case Mom saw it from her bedroom window. hung low from the ceiling, and shadows crawled across the floor as walls caved in. I moved closer and closer and closer to the freezer. The entire time I kept expecting to see something happen. Something at all. I even imagined that deer rising from beneath the lid, pushing it open to stand unnaturally on tall hind legs, where it looked down on me with the same dead eyes I'd seen in my father. That thought alone scared me so badly I nearly hyperventilated myself into a panic attack. But before I had time to really worry about any of that, I found my hand in the freezer latch. I pushed it open. Then I looked inside. The misty vapors cleared to reveal a pile of meat, fur encrusted with ice. There was only one head visible, but I wanted so badly to confirm that there were two animals in there that I took a deep breath and reached and tried to pry some of it loose. Some of it came rooted around in that mound of bone, antlers, and hard flesh. I couldn't see a sign of a second deer. Had Dad really served everyone sick meat? Was that what Larry Sickens, and Mr. Straub, and all those other people, why they'd killed themselves? The thought made me feel ill. I slammed the freezer shut and walked back to the door in a daze, trying with all my might to swallow the painful weight that settled in my gut. I had one foot outside when the freezer door rattled against the ledge. The entire world spun around me. My heart sank. My skin froze in a sensation that was growing increasingly familiar. I turned to face the sound. Both hands braced against the door and watched as the hatch slammed into the lock once more. The light inside the chest came on for the briefest moments, and I glimpsed thrashing fur and deep, deep, deep. Then it happened again, and again, and again, and each time I saw bits of hoof and bone, a strange musculature that frightened me so deeply I fell down into my rear end and I didn't even realize. When the latch finally gave way, the lid flew open and stayed there. Light poured out of the box, and I waited, breath held, for that thing to emerge. To come to life, roaring out of sight and bearing down towards me on unnatural legs. But nothing happened. The silence stretched on for what seemed like an eternity, until at last there was a crash louder than any before, and the entire freezer rocked back and forth, and slowly fell over. The deer, or the parts of the deer, fell out with a hard, wet thump. Bits of its chin and face shattered in the hard, packed ground. sending little shards of meat and bone skating across the floor, unmelting streaks of blood. Some of them even reached my feet. The thing inside moved with the sound of snow crunching beneath your feet. Its thick neck and broken head twisting side to side, scanning the shed's interior with baldy eyes. I'd never seen anything move like that before. Not before or since. This was worse than the man in the tunnel. Worse by 1,000 times. Because the deer was still mostly frozen, but some impossible force was making the crystallized water in its own cells, and the result was skin that ripped like tissue, and muscles that cracked and crunched as they tried to flex and contract. It lifted its head and I tried to scream. The breathy sound that left its fuzzy black lips made my heart start skipping beats. While my bladder emptied, I couldn't help it. I couldn't stop myself, and when I looked down, saw pieces of melting flesh start to writhe and wriggle. I tried with all my might to stifle the cry building in my throat, but it escaped as a desperate, high-pitched whine. The deer turned its head towards me with a violent swing, another breathy shriek, and then it began to thrash its stiff and frozen legs in a terrifying attempt to get closer to me. To say it had a predatory look would be inaccurate. Anyone who sees a predator in action knows that nature is mostly indifferent when it kills. A bear tears into its prey with the same dull look of someone opening their McDonald's. Predators don't hate the things they hunt, but this thing, I could feel its hatred, its malice. It was nothing like what I'd seen in my dad's eyes, or even the eyes of the man in the tunnel. But it had spent months in that box. This was the disease when you skip 3 months ahead. Anger, hatred, Jesus, I couldn't even say if it was gonna eat me. That's what you think when you see a zombie, right? It's gonna try and take a big bite out of you. But this frozen clump of hair and meat and braying lips dragged itself across the floor with an expression like murderous rage. The look of someone ready to beat another living thing to death, using its only hands if it had to. Unable to face it a moment longer, I dragged myself back onto my feet and fled. Blood. Shutting my eyes as I entered the cold night air, I made it three steps before I slammed into my dad. It was like running full speed into a tree. I bounced back and hit the earth, pain flaring up my coccyx as my father loomed over me. He felt cold for the brief moment where he'd made contact with me. My mind blocked out the sound of something hideous scrambling in the shed behind me, and the entire world narrowed until it was just the face of the man who'd raised me, looking down with the pale, dead eyes. When did I die? I pulled myself up and grabbed his hand. He was cold, but his pulse was racing. I could even see the veins in his forearms throb sickeningly. Dad, are you okay? They told me I was sick, he said, his eyes glazing vacantly at the empty space behind me. I think they're right, but there's more. He looked at me. The intensity of his gaze was so powerful that I let go of his hand and I took a step back. For the first time in my life, I was scared of him. I'm not alone in here, he said, his voice pleading for help. Slowly his expression twisted into a grotesque mask of agony and desperation. Oh, Jesus, it's just me in here. It isn't just me. I tried to move, but he was a big man and his arms wrapped around me like steel bands. Dad, I cried, struggling to pull myself loose as he sobbed louder and louder. Dad, Jesus, you gotta let go. The shed door burst open. I managed to twist around just enough I could see what came out, and I felt an urgent terror crawl in my flesh. The deer had pulled itself loose from the freezer, and now it stood in the doorway on two legs. Its body looked all wrong in that posture, like when you twist the limbs around a doll. Probably not far from the truth, thinking about it now. Dad didn't react. I began to scream as the nightmare coalesced around me, my father gripping, holding me in place as the horrible thing lurched towards me on two legs. It moved like a claymation or a puppet show gone wrong. It was quicker than I'd feared, as each step brought it closer and closer and closer. I found myself losing what little control I had. I started to scream. Things I thought were bad and worse than so bad I'm not even sure what I can blame other people for putting words in my head. I told my dad I hated him. I called him an SOB. I called him even worse. All that commotion got the attention of other people. The neighbor's lights started coming on. My mom emerged from the back door, wrapping her robe against herself as she squinted at us in the dark. What in the hell is going on? She cried as she stumbled toward us. But when she saw that deer, she started screaming too. I don't know why, but I thought that other people appearing would help somehow. That as 2, 3, half a dozen people came stumbling into the open lawns, peering over waist-high fences, it would stop the slow but inevitable onslaught of that monster. It didn't know such a thing. No, it didn't. Not at all. I had to listen to their confused shouts and cries while gesturing and begging for help. I was gesturing and begging for help the entire time. Sound of the creature over my shoulder getting closer and closer and closer. Oh no. Meanwhile, my hands tried to pry away from my father's thick arms, but each time I got leverage, he simply flexed. He flexed his grip and tightened around me. He was muttering something the whole time, but I couldn't hear it. I couldn't hear it at all. Finally, my mom screamed and ran, swinging an old rake at the space behind me. I heard the impact, the splintering of the wood handle. Then she stumbled backwards, and I had to twist to get a look at the deer that was now just 6 or 7 feet away. The spokes of a rake still sticking out of its base. The monster looked right at me. He is staring. Just staring at me. But right then somebody shouted, "For the love of God, Alice, get away from that thing." Alice is my mother's name. She fell to the floor just seconds before an explosion broke up the night, silencing all the voices and shattering the deer's head like a crystal ball hitting the ground. My heart raced so fast, I thought for a moment I was going to die. Then I looked down at Dad and finally heard what he'd been mumbling this whole time. "I think it's in us. It wants us. It's in us, and it wants us. It's in us, and it wants us." Oh, there isn't much of Dad these days. I got to visit a couple times. Fat lot of people. Fat lot of good it did. As far as I'm concerned, he died that day in the kitchen when he first tried shooting himself. They're treating us in a special hospital. Mom was really upset that visitations are limited, but I think it might be for the best. Her and my sister tested clean. Most people didn't. Most people did. They did. Most of the town isn't sick. But I am. I didn't test clean. Mom snuck me this phone a couple weeks ago, and I've been using it to write. Funny thing is, one of the orderlies saw me on it a few days ago and just laughed. I think that maybe the government isn't too worried about the story getting out. Nobody probably believed me anyway. At first, I didn't really get why until I started actually putting all this down into writing. I got to the part where the half man came out of the tunnel, and I realized no one's gonna believe me. But I gotta try. Partly because I want to protect people. Whatever this disease is, it's a hell of a lot more than just some twisted prions. And I think the government knows that. Certainly Dad did. Most infected did too. That's why they killed themselves off. They wanted out. The voice that comes with this illness is like, it's like your brain is just words in a book. And then someone dipped that book in a full can of used motor oil. Yeah. You just want to give in, hand it all over. You'd want your body, so whatever you do, don't fight. That's worse. Give it up. in hindsight, we should have let Dad take his own life. What he went through was, well, it was probably a lot worse than the others that got to die. Sometimes I think about going into his room with a pillow, but security is pretty tight around him. For me, fiction is still in its early phase. It takes everyone differently, and for me it's taking quite a long time. They think it's because of my age. Still, I can feel it under there, growing. I think it's why I'm writing this. It wants me to. This sickness, it lives out in the woods, way in the part of the soil where the sun hasn't shone in millions of years. It's old enough to remember a time you could walk into Appalachia to what's now called Glasgow. And it's been bumbling around out there, bumbling around out there, in the brains of deer and other things. The sickness tells me this. Tells me it's learning about this new world.